Okay, and then if you flip to page 64, you'll see that it says 1/2 inch approximate for the overhang of the gutter. That's because the various tile have different needs or requirements. First course needs to be set in a position that will assure proper water drop into the gutter or off of the roof. And then the drip edge laps over the top of the gutter. If you're installing a gutter, the drip edge flashing needs to be over the top of the gutter so that water that is wind driven underneath the tile or wind driven at the eave behind that, we want it to go into the gutter and not behind and be trapped between the gutter and the fascia board. And then the extension beyond the eave can vary due to different climate conditions or the gutter details. Flip to page 31 for me. You can see on that drawing, you can see the top plates of the walls, and that indicates that there is no overhang, and that space on the inside of the wall is going to be conditioned, and conditioned meaning air conditioned, cooled, or heated, conditioned by keeping it warmer. And that creates a variable between the inside and the outside moisture, humidity, and the potential for condensation. And that's why we require that there be a separator sheet installed before that drip edge flashing is installed over the top of the wood. So that's on page 31. Another thing I'll point out on page 31, you can see that there is a wind clip installed on that very first tile closest to you in the drawing. And that has nothing to do with the zero overhang or anything else in the picture. It was just an opportunity for us to have the wind clip in there without taking up a drawing or a page of its own. So it'll give me a chance to, again, make you flip a page back to pages 10 and 11. Where would you find an example of a requirement for that wind clip? So if you look at page 10 and 11, we'll break out one of the things that Lisa showed you, all this information that she gave you from table 1A and 1B, and also the relevant footnotes down below. Table 1A and 1B, the information in those boxes describe the basic installation requirements. The footnotes always give you great information, and in this case I want to point out those little wind clips. If you look down in the footnotes, you'll see on both page 10 and 11, in footnote 2, you'll see 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Those are the various details that you are required to implement if you're in an area where the local building official says that the roof is subject to wind velocities in excess of 100 miles an hour, or if you're on a building height that the mean roof height exceeds 40 feet. So if you're in a windy area or you're on a large building where the mean roof height is taller than 40 feet, which is pretty big, you're going to be required to implement the footnote details that are required down there. One of them is that a clip be installed on the perimeter tile. So that's where those clips would come into play. You don't have to worry about it if you're not in a high wind area or you're not on a tall building, but those would be there in the footnotes of page 10 and 11. Okay, and speaking of the eave, one of the details that we know is that with tile roofing we have a pretty wind resistant product, but there are areas on the roof that can be more challenging to a structure from a wind standpoint. And the most vulnerable area is right at the eave. That's kind of like the leading edge of the wing. That's where the wind hits and it changes direction, so you get tremendous uplift right there. And one of the things that we've noticed, we've got a lot of people from the Phoenix area in the class today. One of the things I've noticed in a couple of cases, and we actually had a homeowners association that pursued this, is that you have some relatively short overhangs where only the first row of tile, the first batten, is installed over the overhang. And then there's a concern that if we put a fastener through that batten, through the plywood, and it's an open soffit, you're going to pierce that plywood and you're going to have to be up there on a ladder clipping the ends of the nails off. So very often we'll see that roofers will angle their gun or angle their nail, and that nail, instead of penetrating at a 45 and not punching through the soffit, it will kind of glance off and not make full connection with the deck. And so you see these tile that are flipped over. Lisa mentioned this earlier. The tile are still attached to the batten, but because they use proper nails and proper fastening. But the batten wasn't properly connected to the deck. And so when that vulnerable area right at the eave was subjected to some high winds, it just flipped over the entire batten and the tile with it. So we want to make sure those are fastened properly, and it's a challenge to go back. You know, we don't like to work at the first row because there's a row on top of us and they're all nailed. So we want to make sure that that first row is fastened properly, and a lot of times that's just going to mean locating where the rafter tail is so that you can put your batten fastener into that rafter tail. You can see here the tile still was properly fastened to the batten, but that batten has been turned upside down. Okay, turn to page 64 again, and we'll see that highlighted note that says that the extension beyond the eave can vary due to climate conditions and the gutter detail. So we don't have a specific number. You know, we don't have down to 1/8 of an inch. You must install your tile with X amount of overhang. The roofer has a role to play in determining how that's installed. We're going to install our drip edge flashing first. We're always going to have a drip edge flashing. It's required on every installation. And then we're going to install our underlayment over the top of that. And then we need to know the size of our tile. And we have tile dimensions that are large, and there are tile dimensions that are very small. So we always need to know what tile we're using. For our training today, we're always using a 17-inch concrete tile with lugs when we're talking about layout or installing the first row or the top row. So in this case, we're using a very common dimension, a 17-inch concrete tile with lugs. You can see I've got the tape measure laying on the back of that tile with the start of the tape measure butted into the bottom of the lug. So if we measure that distance, the point where our batten will rest, right there where the tip of the tape measure is butting into the bottom side of the lug, this tile is upside down, and we go down to where there's that slot. You can see the slot in the tile. That's where our eave riser metal will fit when we flip this tile over. We've got a distance of 15 inches between those 2 points. So we take that 15-inch number and we apply that to our roof installation. We've already got our drip edge flashing, we've got our underlayment installed, the 2 V's point to on the left where the eave riser metal will be installed, and the 15-inch mark at the second V upslope is where the top of our batten will be installed. So we install that eave riser metal and we install our first row batten. Our tile fits on and nestles over where the slotted eave riser metal fits, and then the lug hooks over that batten. So our first row chalk line for a batten installation is going to be where the top of the batten is if we're using battens. If we were using a direct-to-deck application and we weren't using battens, our eave drip edge would still be in the same place, our eave riser metal would still be in the same place, but our first row chalk line would be indicating where we put the top of the tile, not where we install the batten. It's just an adjustment we need to be aware of when we're laying out our tile for that first row. So let's take a look at page 29. Turn to page 29 and we're going to take a look at several of the most common installation details at the eave. Okay, the very first one is what I think is probably the most common. We've got our eave drip edge flashing and an eave riser metal.